2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Martin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.
In today's episode of Project Recovery,
so many times we have people come sit down in this exact chair where I am to start their story. Now, their story of becoming an alcoholic or being a heroin user or whatever doesn't start with the first time they picked up the needle. It starts usually when you ask them, let's hear a little backstory about you.
Right.
Let's find out a little bit about who you are.
make sure you listen to the end. Find us on Facebook at Project Recovery. We'll have that and much more coming up.
Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's about recovering. It's brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org, where they help you talk to your doctor, to your loved ones, and to yourself about opioids. Sometimes there might be a better alternative, maybe going in there with the facts and being able to ask questions to a doctor. So important, and that's why we've got Dr. Matt here, because, you know, a lot of times we just take what doctors say for law, but they really don't know everything that's going on with you.
Well, doctors of any sort, any medical professional, they're not mind readers, right? Mm-hmm. And even as a psychologist, I've had people before say, well, why didn't you ask me about that? I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me about that? You know, like we're pretty good at intuiting, but your physician and your nurse, your PA, those people are pretty busy. So know your script. Go in with your questions. Go in with your information. Know yourself so you can share with them. Say, I've had a problem with this in the past. Are there some alternatives to opioids?
And it might not even be problems that you're having, but might be in the family.
Or saying, I have, like you and I've talked about taking our kids in for different things and saying, is there an alternative so that my son or daughter doesn't have their first experience with an opioid problem when they're 15.
Like when your son got his triple nipple removed.
Yeah.
You guys went straight to...
And it's looking good.
You went to ibuprofen and Tylenol.
We did. We skipped any narcotics and just went straight to that, and it worked fine.
You know, I've really enjoyed over the past couple of weeks the guests that have been on the show, and a lot of them have actually talked about know your script, how it would have been beneficial to know that 15, 20 years ago.
We didn't have this culture then. Even 10 years ago, we didn't really have the culture that we have today about being open about opioids, talking about it, and going in and asking your doctor questions. I think people feel like, I don't want to challenge my doctor because I don't know what we're talking about because I'm not a medical professional. It's not challenging them. Doctors usually appreciate it, and any good physician is going to welcome your questions. If your doctor thinks you shouldn't be asking them questions, switch doctors.
Yeah. Hey, we were supposed to have a guest today, but at 5:15 this morning, he sent me a text and said he wasn't going to be able to be here. And we are so grateful and lucky to have everybody who reaches out to us who is willing to share their story on this podcast. And we continue to encourage you to do so. You can reach us on Instagram, Facebook, email, all of those, and send us a kind of a brief synopsis of your story and why you want to come on and do it. And we're now starting to get mail, Dr. Matt.
I know. We got some packages today.
Yeah, this is from Hugh D. Watt. He's an MSW, LCSW. He sent a book called Trial Tapping. And then I thought, man, this guy's got a warped sense of humor. He sent me a mini bottle.
Well, it was wrapped up in a bubble wrap, so it looked like a mini bottle in bubble wrap. And
it looked like whiskey because it was this golden tone.
Yeah.
And then I unwrapped it, and it's actually a maple syrup.
Yes.
Which is worth its weight in gold.
Yes.
I mean, it's expensive, and it's Trial Tappers, tapping pain, find a path, and grow stronger. So
I look forward to having him on the show. Come on and talk about his work.
And I want to talk to you about something, and that's why sometimes when the guests don't show, I utilize this to my own benefits.
Yeah.
Because I've been wrestling something in my recovery. And it's reading comments and running into people and having everyday interactions with others.
Okay.
And a lot of times people will say, were you drunk then? Were you drunk when you did this? Were you drunk when you did that? And we just had an interaction with somebody in the building who's been a longtime friend of mine.
Right.
And
who said that exact thing.
And they go back through my history of things that I've done. And they wonder if I was an alcoholic then, if I was a drunk then. Now, probably the honest answer is, yeah. Was I in full-blown addiction? Probably not.
Right.
Was I walking that
The way we use the term alcoholic, I think we could say you were an alcoholic then. The way you and I kind of like to use the term drunk, which I'm sure isn't PC anymore, but one of my favorite terms, I would say that's somebody who's right in the middle of using. They're using at that time, and they're at the height of their addiction. So no, you weren't at the height of your addiction all those years. There were a lot of years and months that went by that you didn't drink at all. And certainly most of the time when you were working, you weren't drinking. But as life changes and stressors crept in, I think that's when that alcoholism really took off. But I think it was always there, right?
I agree with you 100%. The problem I have is with the general public who paint you with such a broad stroke of once you find out you're an alcoholic, anything that you've done in the past, good or bad, is automatically tainted. And I want to go, some of those conversations, some of the stuff I did on TV, majority of it I was sober for.
Right.
And, and somehow it's gotten tainted. And I'll go back and read comments and go, all those years I didn't know you were an alcoholic. And like they're looking down on me.
Well, there's judgment with that, right? Of course. And I think that being in the public eye, people probably do want to know if when you were on TV or when you were, doing remotes and things, if you were drinking at that time. And I think I know the answer, that the answer is no. The vast majority of the time you weren't. But for you, I think the pattern was kind of, after work that you start drinking. But I mean, I feel like you're a little tense about it because, well, I don't know. You tell me, how's this making you feel? Because I think this is happening more and more often. And it happened this morning with one of our friends who didn't mean anything by it, but you guys were talking, you were reminiscing about something, and he's like, "Hey, were you drunk at that time?" And I could tell it kind of bothered you.
And look, I know part of me deserves that because it is who I was and what I did, but it was. I just don't want everything that I've done to be tainted because of that, because the genuine connections I had with people, the genuine things that I got to do on TV and interactions with people, for the most part, was sincerely and honestly me. And if I had a few drinks, it didn't make me a bad person, and I wasn't an alcoholic at that time, or maybe I was. And see, that's what I'm wrestling with right now, because sometimes we say someone's an alcoholic and you automatically think they're a bad person. Because they're an alcoholic doesn't mean they're a bad person. It means they're suffering from a disease that they don't know how to get a handle of, and they're trying to figure it out themselves. So sometimes, you know what it is? It's the alcoholic. I hate that term. Okay. I hate that term because it's got such a negative connotation. So much in the fact when I stood up in my first 12-step meeting when I was in detox, I stood up and said, "I'm Casey Scott. I'm an alcoholic." I hated that.
Well, they kind of force that on you, right?
Because I just go, what am I supposed to do? And they say, stand up and say you're an alcoholic.
Well, why do you hate that? What does it mean to you?
It means me at my worst. And the majority of my interactions where people had me at the best.
Yeah.
And when you label somebody an alcoholic, which I am.
You don't like the term, but you admit that you are?
Yeah. I don't like the term because it's such a negative connotation of it that everything that you've ever done has been in question now and been tainted by this broad stroke of the term alcoholic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I choose to say I'm a guy in recovery, and I'm moving forward, and I'm trying to do the best I can, and I'm giving it everything I got. But when you say alcoholic, it just automatically makes everybody question everything about you, your loyalty, your friendship, your thoughts, your decisions, which I can kind of see why, but there's so much more to that person than just that. And that's why when we talk to people in this, we say, hey, love the addict, hate the disease. But sometimes it gets so convoluted between the addict and the disease. The line gets so blurry. But we've had some of the best people in here talking about the worst times they've ever been.
Right.
And that's not who they are all the time. They just got in a bad situation and got in the way over their head and didn't know how to get out of it.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that even when a person is using and they haven't gone into recovery yet, they're not always intoxicated, right? They're not always high. They're not always drunk. And I think kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying is by focusing on I'm an alcoholic and focusing on the times that you were drinking, it distracts people and maybe even yourself from connecting with the good person that you are and all the good things that you did. And the reality is, and I don't know if most people know this because of maybe how we've talked about your story, but you've had a over 20 plus year career on the radio and TV and the media here in Salt Lake, and the vast majority of that time you drank when you were not working, and you were not drinking in a way that stopped you from functioning. And it increased over time to where, after the divorce and a few other things happened, the drinking was happening more regularly. And I think that's the part of your life that you feel the most shame about. But, back in the radio days and back when we were doing TV together, I mean, it wasn't that out of control. And I think maybe you're feeling like I want people to see that part of me too.
And I don't want to discount the fact that I did some horrible things and I was a mess and my life was unmanageable and uncontrollable, because it was. And for that's what I'm rectifying, and that's where I'm moving forward from.
And that's the problem with substance abuse and addiction is the low times, the times we mess up, cause a lot of damage. And so it's hard for people sometimes to look past that. Human beings have a tendency to be all or nothing. We like to simplify things. If you think about how you think about things, we really have this natural tendency as humans to break things down to the least common denominator, to make them simple. We like to simplify things, and then we feel satisfied. So thinking in terms of all or nothing, black and white, that's pretty simple. It doesn't get a lot more simple than that.
But that's the way they used to think about alcoholism and substance abuse back then. It is black and white. Now, in its purest form, it is that simple. You do or you don't. But to get there is a gray area, and people have got to figure out their own way to get there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm actually also kind of criticizing our human tendency to break things down to the simplest form, because most things aren't simple. And understanding alcoholism and how it works in a person's life, or drug addiction, how it works in their life, is not a simple process. There's a lot of psychology. There's a lot of mental health. There's a lot of childhood history. And there's a lot of current stressors. All need to be factored into understanding, why is this person struggling to the degree that they are? Why has the disease gotten a hold of them? Now, when it comes to, are you using, are you not? I think that's a great place for black and white thinking. It's like you either need to be sober or not if you are hooked by the disease of alcoholism. Mm-hmm. But really understanding a person is not that simple. It never is.
And that's one thing that I really value about our time here when we do this podcast once a week. It's so insightful to sit down with our guests, whether it be heroin, opioids, Ritalin,
pornography,
Xanax. We're going to get to gambling coming up in a bit. But that became their solution to a problem. A lot of people have a problem, and the way they coped and dealt with their problems was to numb themselves, to escape through the vices of alcohol or substance abuse or whatever it may be, pornography.
Sure.
But what you need to do is get down to the root problem. What are you trying to escape? What are you trying to avoid? What are you and that's what this podcast does. And so many times we have people come sit down in this exact chair where I am to start their story. Now, their story of becoming an alcoholic or being a heroin user or whatever doesn't start with the first time they picked up the needle.
Oh, for sure.
It starts usually when you ask them, let's hear a little backstory about you.
Right.
Let's find out a little bit about who you are. And it usually starts in 5th grade, 4th grade.
Yep.
It's some sort of trauma that then turns into this, and then they find this escape, and then it becomes their way to deal with it, and then it takes hold. I'm generalizing it, but that's normally how the story goes.
We could probably count up a pretty high percentage of our guests over the last couple of years that would fit that model. And I think that's a very common model for any of our bad habits. So a person may not consider themselves an addict to fast food or an addict to what are these drink places?
The soda shops.
Soda shops, an addict to different things. I even saw there's a place in Salt Lake where it's just a cereal store.
Oh, yeah.
You just go eat cereal.
Oh, yeah. And they got all the cereals.
I can't go in there.
It's like going to the Henderson's house. They always had the best cereal.
The best cereals, yeah.
We had grape nuts, and
you
that's
may
about
not
it.
consider that that's an addiction in your life, but you have to admit it's a bad habit because it's creating some pretty unhealthy things in your life. How you eat, how you entertain yourself, and then drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, all the big ones. And if you think about it, you're running away from something, you're escaping something, you're numbing out somehow, somewhere, if you're overindulging in any of those things. If they're taking time away from more productive things in your life, if they are costing you more money than you really should be spending on it, and if you really take a look at your health, if it's negatively impacting your health, then the key insight's the key. And so to find that, you need to pause and say, well, maybe I need to do like the guests on the show and kind of think back to when did my need to escape, when did my need to kind of numb out, when did I start running away? When you're a kid, sometimes it's literal. We've had people on the show talking about, they just started skipping school at a tremendously young age. Well, what were they running away from? Something. Mm-hmm. And certainly, can I admit something that I'm actually not very happy with myself about on this show?
Yeah.
You and I are talking about this recently, and we'll get guests on the show, and we really do sincerely appreciate them coming on and being so open and authentic and sharing their story. And so the listeners probably don't get much insight into what a real therapy session would be like, because that's not what we're doing here. In a real therapy session, a lot of these people, I would be grilling them and trying to get them to really take therapy seriously, because a lot of people have come on this show and they've gotten sober and it's amazing and they're doing great things, but I know they haven't really done the trauma therapy that they need to do.
They call that a dry drunk.
To some degree, yeah. Yep.
For the most part, is they're just not drinking, but they haven't went back and addressed the issues that are underlying.
And on the air, I don't hold people's feet to the fire, because I don't want somebody to come on here and feel like they got railroaded or embarrassed. Because you and I talk to every guest before we start recording, and we say, we want you to share what you're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And I may ask some probing questions, and I do, but I think that's something I'm going to start doing more on the show, is really pushing to get people to talk about, have they done the therapy that they needed to do for those issues that they're identifying, because they identify them on our show, the traumas and things that they've had. And if they're not doing it, why aren't they? Because maybe that's something we need to understand. There are roadblocks and stumbling blocks to getting into good therapy and good treatment. Not all therapy is created equal. I actually have a patient that I was speaking with today, and I've recommended that she go work. She'll still see me for certain things, but I want her to go work with a trauma specialist. I'm not a trauma specialist, but somebody that will do some specific types of therapy to help her with trauma, and she's going to go do that for a while and then come back and work with me again. And that's therapists specialize in different things, and I don't think the general public knows that. And so my hope is we can get some therapists coming on the show to talk a little bit more about how do you get into therapy, what are specific types of therapy, specifically trauma therapy, because that's so highly associated with substance abuse. And So I think that's my resolution, to do a better job of that.
So I think, to bring it back full circle, is that's what I'm saying. And I think that's where I get frustrated, is when people paint addiction with a broad stroke and say, this is it, and because of this, you're this, this, and that. Now, I'm not saying that I wasn't those things that I've been accused of and that I've copped to and that I've said I've done. And I've done those, and that was me. Yeah. But that's not who I am. That was me, and I did those.
Can I throw something out at you? Can I interpret what you're saying?
Yeah.
And tell me if I'm wrong.
No.
But I think I know you well enough. You don't like alcoholic because, like you already said, it reminds you and references back to the worst moments in your life when you were your worst self. Mm-hmm. But I think it's more than that. We've talked about the fact that, and I'm big into personality. Personality is who we are, and it's how we do what we do. And you're an optimist. That's one of your biggest personality characteristics. It's been obvious to anybody that knows you. And what's the name of our show? Project Recovery.
Yeah.
And what do you like to say? You said it already today. I'm a person in recovery. Mm-hmm. you're an optimist and you want to focus on what you're doing that's positive and optimistic, and that's your self-identity. And I think it is hard to over-identify with the negative. I like the fact that you're willing to admit it and own it, and you've been very open in talking about the problems that your alcoholism has caused. But I think the reason it really bugs you is just because it doesn't jive with Casey, the optimist. You're like, no, but this is who I am now. And most of the time when I was doing great stuff, that's who I was then.
Yeah. You know, and it goes back to reading comments and social Facebook and all that stuff. I could read 101 positive comments. And as soon as there's one guy saying mean stuff about, I'm like, F that guy, man. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know what I've gone through. Why am I letting that guy get under my skin? I just had 101 people say nice things and how proud they are and what a wonderful girl I'm raising and all this other stuff. But that one guy gets me. And I go, you don't get to say that about me because you don't know me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we put it out there so they get to say it.
I know, but it gets me. I'm only human.
I know.
And I go, and I'll go to bed and I'll think of that guy. And then I'll go, I'm going to say something. I'm not going to say something.
We got to let that go. You got to let that go.
For once in my life, I'm not going to say something.
But I like our show because our show is optimistic just like you are optimistic. And it's Project Recovery. We focus on the recovery. We don't ignore the addiction and how we got to where people are at. But man, I love being optimistic and I love working with you because we can take such serious topics like suicide and depression and pornography, drug abuse, everything. And man, at the end of every session here, I typically feel great.
Walk a little lighter.
Yeah.
A little happier. Hey, thank you for the free therapy session, Dr. Matt. I really do appreciate it. Please don't bill me. My insurance isn't good. You're going to want to stick around because Project Recovery is going to be right back. And we're going to be talking about how coronavirus has affected substance abuse and what Dr. Matt has dug up on the interwebs.
A stranger with a gun came upon two teens taking pictures under a rising full moon. But violence is only the beginning of this story.
Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are, and this is a big one.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and I've spent my career talking about how lives are undone by violence. The Letter is a podcast about how lives are remade. Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That is Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist. He's currently looking on his phone right now. He's digging
up my notes.
Oh, your notes.
Yep.
So you said you came in today because I texted you early this morning when I found out we weren't having a guest. You said, let me do some stuff because we have been talking in meetings and in between message threads and all that of what this corona really is going to do for mental health and substance abuse.
Definitely. We want to keep up on that because stress inflames tendencies to want to escape, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's where addictions either are created or they definitely flourish. And, this has been one crazy year with a lot of stressors. I certainly know that in mental health, we're all very, very busy with lots of referrals because people are struggling with stress and it's affecting families and individuals in lots of different ways. But I have some notes here on a few different articles that I had read recently and pulled back and put together. In fact, it's interesting. When I started being a psychologist, when I came in with notes, I had this cool leather folder and I had paper notes.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, and that lasted
Indiana
for a while.
Jones.
Yeah. And then I went digital and I would bring in either my laptop or I'd bring in like an iPad. And now it's like everything's on my phone. So I just have all my notes on my phone. Isn't that weird?
And you forgot your glasses. So
I forgot my glasses, but I've got these memorized. So one thing I want to talk about is there was a study that was done from April last year, 2020, to September 2020 in the UK. And they looked at how drinking, what are the patterns, habits of drinking going on in during COVID, during lockdown, and then what kind of factors are in making it worse. Mm-hmm. And the first part's not that different from what we already know. They found that about 56% of people were drinking more than they usually were. A small percentage said they were drinking less, about 20%.
I'm going to stop you. I think probably for the most part, and I'm just speaking with a guy with experience, and had I been drinking when this virus first took hold and the pandemic and the quarantine and all that started to happen, my mind would have said, hey, this is going to be done in a month. This is a 2-week free vacation. And kind of...
I think a lot of people went there. Yeah.
And just kind of treated it kind of like that. Hey, look, we don't have to go into work. 5 o'clock's going to come a little bit earlier. And so I think people probably just says, we're just going to drink and kind of just wait the storm out.
I think there was a big, or if you remember, there was a big run on the liquor stores. People were like, hey, we'll have a little home bar and we'll just kind of have this, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, it's probably going to be what, 2 months, 3 months?
Yeah.
I was so naive, and I think most of us were.
And so I think they probably did that, and then they realized that this is going a little longer. And then all of a sudden, jobs start to be affected,
right?
And mortgages and all that stuff starts playing. So now the 2-week month that you were drinking just because you thought you were going to have a little respite has now become, this is getting a little serious. Yeah.
And unfortunately, you're right. A lot of people started day drinking is the term, drinking during the day, and that got earlier and earlier. And of course, this study, like a lot of studies that we've seen, have shown that people who started working from home were at higher risk, of course, because I guess you can drink and nobody, off the Zoom call and come back on. And
I'll tell you right now, they've been putting it in coffee mugs.
Yeah, putting it in coffee mugs, sure, and all sorts of things. And so we know that was at higher risk. People who were able to still work, like go into work, were at lower risk. If you were working primarily from home, you were at higher risk. In the highest risk category where people got laid off, of course, because then you have the stress and all the time.
Makes sense.
But one of the things that this UK study found, which I'm glad to highlight, is that people with pre-existing anxiety disorders, anybody who already struggled with anxiety before the lockdown started, they were at the highest risk. They were doing the most drinking. And that kind of dovetails into our conversations about mental health. It makes sense. Anxiety, if you haven't been anxious, if you haven't had real anxiety, if you've never had a panic attack, and in fact, I think 74% of adults in America will have at least one significant panic attack in their lifetime. So if you haven't had one, you might get one. It's miserable. I'm not a all the time anxious guy, but I can go there sometimes. And anxiety is really miserable. And I've had a couple panic attacks, textbook ones in my life, and boy, those are tough.
Can't get out of my body fast enough.
You've had them, right? Yeah.
Painful. And my older brother used to get them, and I think you are a wussy until I got one, and I went, whoa, this is debilitating.
I have a good friend who's been an ER doc, was an ER doc for almost 30 years. And he said more than one occasion, he's like, when somebody comes in with a full-blown serious panic attack, it takes even guys who've done it a long time a little while to figure out it's not a heart attack. That's how physical a panic attack can be.
Wow.
But worrying, having those repetitive worries all the time, just low-grade anxiety all the time, people have a drink and they go, oh, I feel better. And so it's interesting that came up here in this study, that amongst their I think they had 22,000 people that were called drinkers, people who drank. Of the 22,000, people who had pre-existing anxiety issues, just in general, were at much higher risk for drinking than people without the anxiety. And they were on par with drinking as much, it looks like, as the people who lost their jobs. So you can see that increased stress, whether you bring it biologically or it hits you through being laid off financially. A lot of divorces happened this last year and separations. All of those things heavily contribute to it. Another study, if I could have my way, it makes terrible radio, so I won't do it. But I'd read some of the studies. But another one was talking about this has continued on now to where here we are. As of this study was concluded in February of this year, we have way more people drinking to cover up stress and mental health issues than we did a year ago in the United States. And so as the pandemic, and this is kind of in line with what Dr. Fauci said recently, as the pandemic starts to wind down, we hope, even though there's some indication that it's not winding down as quickly as we hoped, we're going to have to really get in and start working with people on their drinking. There's going to be a lot of leftover alcoholics, if you want to think of it that way, and a lot of people who've chosen alcohol and drugs to treat their mental health disorders instead of going in and getting treatment. So if you're at home and you're considering, should I do a distance therapy session? Should I talk to a psychiatrist and get some medication? I have to do it over Zoom. Do it. It's working. It's effective. It's much better than staying home and trying to self-medicate. And that, if I can do a little stream of consciousness, brings me to the fact that I cannot believe I'm going to criticize the state of Utah right now. They're lifting the mask ban this weekend, and it is ridiculous. If you're listening and you had anything to do with that, give me a call. That is absolutely ridiculous. We are so close to really turning the corner on this, and now all the cities and counties are going to be fighting it out. So you're going to go from one city to one county to one city, and everything's going to be different. For heaven's sakes, why lift the ban?
Yeah, I'm not gonna jump in on that one.
I will.
I know.
They can call me.
No, I know.
We have a vaccine that's 95% effective. The vaccines are getting out there. We need to put effort into helping allay people's fears about the vaccine, help them realize that it's not full of preservatives. It's very healthy. It's very effective. And that's going to be what turns the corner. Why are we taking masks off now?
And that I don't have an answer for.
Well, it's ridiculous. I can tell you why. It's the conservative part of our state. And they feel like they've had enough. But businesses have figured out how to make money, and things are moving forward. We should keep that ban through the summer.
See, and for my part on this whole pandemic, I haven't had corona that I know of. Maybe I'm asymptomatic.
You've been tested, though, right?
No.
Oh, you've never got tested? Oh.
And right now I'm currently weighing my options on the 3 different shots. And I'm one of these guys that I'm just trying to really figure out. I'm listening to both sides.
Go do it.
And it's making me nuts. I was getting ready.
There's no other side. There is no other side.
I was getting ready.
There's paranoia.
I've got that.
Is the only other side.
I've got that. I've got paranoia.
Education and science, no other side.
So I'm trying to get the education and science part of it.
Well, I'll tell you.
But I know what I'm listening to you, and I'm not anti-vaccine at all. I'm really not. And I want to jump out there and do that, and I'm just trying to figure it out. Like, because you hear these horror stories, man, and people that I know.
It's BS. They're making it up. It's just not. I mean, they're like one swallow doesn't make a summer. Like, is that a saying? It's like just because one person, had a problem doesn't mean you're going to. And the evidence is overwhelmingly positive.
And so right now, this is where my head is, and I'm going to tell you, because we're going to talk about this in just a second, because we're looking for somebody to come on and talk about a gambling addiction.
Yeah, and I have an article I want to reference before we finish about gambling.
Okay, and I'm a betting man. I like to bet.
I know you are.
I like to bet. I'm not to the extreme where it's an addiction, but I like to bet. And if I had to bet right now on getting the coronavirus or a vaccine, I'd rather bet on the vaccine because there is some science to it. If I'm betting on just not getting the corona, that's just waiting to see.
It's a fool's bet.
Yeah.
You're just hanging around.
Yeah, just to hope I don't get it.
Yeah.
And if I get the vaccine, then there's a good chance if I do get it, I'm
going to go so far as to say that this vaccine happening in 1 year's time with the efficiency of 95% is a modern miracle. It is absolutely an amazing accomplishment that we have 3 different companies with 3 different vaccines that you can go get for free to stop a worldwide pandemic. You tell me how that's not an amazing miracle.
I can.
It's phenomenal. We have never seen anything like this.
But we've never seen anything.
It took over a decade to get out of the Spanish flu. 100 years ago, there was no science like this 100 years ago. We couldn't accomplish what we did this year. It is amazing.
Wow. See, I'm getting education. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to gambling.
Okay.
You've got some statistics because gambling is on the up because of Corona and the quarantine.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about how, during all the alcohol, people who didn't used to have a little bar at their house, have a little makeshift bar at their house, people are buying alcohol, bringing it home. I can tell you right now, the best thing you could probably do is get that out of your house. Just don't bar up at home, okay?
Yeah.
If you're struggling with it, or even if you have children or whatever. But we haven't really talked a lot about other addictions on the rise. And there's a recent study that shows that over this past year, there's been a significant, I think it's, I'm going to go off the top of my head, it was upper 50% increase in online gambling. And people now, as of from November till now, an increase in people seeking help for their gambling addiction, going to Gamblers Anonymous and things like that, because people are at home. And this study that I'm going to reference is an interesting one because one of their subsets were high-performance athletes. So the professional athletes, the high-performance people at that sort of
the LeBron Jameses.
The LeBron Jameses, but also like national team level people trying to make the Olympics. And I'm going to extrapolate on this study a little bit, but those folks are really gambling because they were really worried about, like, I don't have any excitement in my life. These are high performance people. I'm not a high performance person. I accomplish things in life, but high performance people are up at 4, go, go, go. They have crazy goals. They're usually climbing this and running that and doing this race, and they're doing all these things. And you know high performance people in your life.
They're always looking for the rush.
And so I would say high performance people, even if they're not a professional athlete like this study focused on, those folks are probably at much higher risk for feeling like I need something to stimulate me, something exciting. And for me, we've talked about this. You and I are the polar opposite on gambling. Mm-hmm. I would rather know I could go, take my $20 and buy a cheeseburger than throw it down on red and lose it on black. Like gambling is not fun for me. It's anxiety provoking.
I'm going to take that $20. I'm going to win 40. I'm buying everybody cheeseburgers.
Yeah, that's your, and you probably will, and I would lose it because there's something about the energy I bring. It just doesn't work for me. But high performance people need that excitement. They need that thrill. And if they've been laid off of work or they can't get out and go do the high performance activities, the competitions that they used to do, like, things like the marathons and the triathlons and all those sorts of things, then what are they left with? Well, a lot of them have found gambling. We know at least this study focused on professional athletes and how much more they're gambling problematically. So my question to you is, I know that before this, you've always liked gambling. Has your gambling gone up? I think you've said already today you don't think it's a problem, but have you seen an increase in your tendency to either gamble online or something like that?
No, it's all pretty consistent because one thing my mom taught me is never gamble what you can't afford to lose. You know what I mean? So I don't have an influx of money. A lot of times it's just me playing poker online and not even for real money. But I mean, I like the thinking part of it. I like to, but no, I would say no.
See, I don't know anything about this. Are there sites you can go on and play poker, but it's just like
fake money?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so you can win money and you can lose money. You can buy chips that don't mean anything. But I mean, you log on and you play.
Okay.
But then also I like to play poker with my friends. We get together once a month and sit down around a poker table. Yeah. And that's more about the camaraderie and then just the BS and stuff like that. So
you haven't seen a big change?
No, I haven't seen a big change. Okay. But I mean, I know gambling.
Do you think if you had a big income right now, do you think that could have gotten out of hand this year?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know.
Because it's a thrill, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I get the concept of like that thrill of, like what cards am I going to get? And
mine's never about the outcome. It's about the entertainment. And it just, okay. You know what I mean? I'm not under the.
Well, that might be a protective factor then.
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of people who it's about the thrill and the outcome.
Yeah, I'm never going to win enough money to pay my mortgage, and I'm never going to lose enough money.
You don't think that way? Because a lot of guys think that way.
No, I don't know, because I don't think that way.
Okay.
Because I'm not willing to risk that much.
Yeah.
And for me, it's more about entertainment and as a way to keep busy and see if I'm smarter than the game I'm playing. And so, but I don't bet that much.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I was worried about you when I read this because I'm like, well, Casey's kind of a high performance guy, and I read this. It was interesting. It was such a specialty population. Professional athletes have seen a big increase in gambling problems this year. And I just wanted to think, well, there's a lot of people that are like professional athletes in their personality.
Yeah.
But they're not professional athletes. So I would call them high performance people. A lot of people who are like a day trader type person, that's a high performance gambler right there, right?
Well, but let's just be honest, that's gambling. I
It
mean,
is.
people will tell you it's not, but it is.
Well, I mean, I understand the differences, but the personality that would want to do that is not that dissimilar from somebody who would want to go out to Vegas and gamble, right?
Yeah. Well, sorry for being all over the map today.
I think it was fun. Did you have a fun conversation?
I like it. And I want to reiterate that when I talked this earlier in the podcast, I mean, I'm not mad at anybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just some things frustrate me.
I'm annoyed with the state of Utah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it.
Yeah. Well, and I hope that's okay.
Oh, you're going back there.
I'm going back. No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm just saying I don't usually throw out big opinions, I don't think, on the show.
But this is your show. I feel like you should.
I can't believe it. It blows me away. And honestly, if you're listening and you have a good explanation for me, give me a call. I'd love to talk to you. I am not a closed-minded person. And if you have something interesting to say, maybe we'll even have you on the show.
I love it. Hey, don't forget, you've been listening to Project Recovery. It's brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org. And if you have a story you want to tell, reach out to us. We'd love to be the platform for you to do so. Project Recovery is a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.
2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.